27, lawyer, over 25 years experience conveyancing, property law, wills and estates. She also specialises in landlords and tenants. We touched on that last week. Welcome to you, Despina. This week, Neighbourhood Disputes.
Yes, this is a big one, Despina. Morning.
Morning. It's a big one. It's a fun topic as well.
Yeah, I think most people would be able to give you a story about their neighbours at one time or another.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's a really interesting topic because there's more to it than meets the eye. It's not just about dividing fences, and I think that's the common dispute that people have when they go, oh, I'm having a problem with my neighbour, and it's usually about the fence. But neighbourhood disputes can actually cover a lot more than that. So I'd like to talk about that today.
Well, we actually do have an email sent through from breakfast@radio.com.au. Basically, Rodney from Palm Beach wants to know what he can do about the branches that are overhanging and blocking his TV reception because the trees don't sit in his backyard.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let's go back to starting with what are the common causes of disagreements between neighbours? Because as I said before, it's not just about dividing fences. So let's go through that and then we'll get a bit more involved with the Act and what the legislation says and the details. So the common causes we find for disagreements between neighbours are overhanging branches, right, we talked about,
Yes.
overhanging branches that have fruit, which is interesting
Yeah,
because
who gets the fruit?
who gets the fruit, you know, your orange trees, your lemon trees
They're
and
on my
anything else.
side, sure.
That's
it,
right.
that's
So
it.
is it mine?
Is it mine?
Can I do what I like with it? So that's a common cause. Roots causing damage because the roots, funnily enough, sounds logical to a part of the tree.
Of course.
All right. And branches blocking sunlight, as you said, causing problems with solar panels and TV reception.
Solar panels too.
Yes, and of course the dreaded divided fence. So those are the common causes of disagreements with neighbours.
I do know of a case where someone went ahead and put a fence up, and once they erected it, then wanted the neighbour to pay up. But is there a consultation that has to take place in order, or do you always have to go halves?
So we've talked in the previous weeks about communication, and it's always important, particularly here though with your neighbour. So even if you don't like your neighbour for whatever reason, when you've got neighbour disputes or the possibility of neighbour disputes such as overhanging branches and dividing fence issues, you've got to communicate with your neighbour first of all. You can't just run off to QCAT, make an application, not talk to your neighbour, serve them with a notice to fence without talking to them. That's just the wrong thing to do. So you've got to talk to them.
The authorities, before you take it to any sort of arbitration, they will want to know, firstly, what have you done to solve this situation?
Absolutely. So with dividing fences, it's very clear. You've got to serve it. You've got to talk to the neighbour. You've got to serve them with a notice to fence. But the idea and the intention behind the Act is for you to have that open communication. Because when you go to QCAT, they will ask you, well, what have you done? What steps have you taken beforehand to try and resolve the issue with your neighbour? And if you haven't, then you're going to be in a little bit of trouble. So the logical thing to do is to talk to your neighbour first. If you want to erect a fence because there's really nothing there, or if the fence is dilapidated, so it's falling down or potentially falling down, or you just want to change the fence. So you might have a paling fence, wooden paling fence, and you want to make it a colour-bond fence, for example. So those are the things you need to talk to your neighbour about with dividing fences. And when you mentioned before about, well, what type of fence and how do you resolve it, it usually comes down to your neighbourhood. So if you're in a neighbourhood in a street where most of the houses have colour-bond fences, dividing fences, and you want to erect something quite different that's out of the ordinary, you might have some problems with that because the neighbour's going to say, well, look at the facade around in the neighbourhood and the street, and it's going to add value to our properties. I want a colour-bond fence. And even with that, you can still get into trouble because the neighbour might want to say, well, I want a paling fence. I'm not going to pay for a colour bond. And then you might have the disproportion of contributions towards your dividing fence. But the principle behind that is when you want to erect a dividing fence or repair a dividing fence and put a new one in, the idea is for the neighbours to contribute usually 50-50 with the cost of erecting or repairing and maintaining a dividing fence. Because it's on your boundary line. So it's between the two lots. So it's something that you share. You share in the maintenance and repair and the cost.
Yeah.
Now, if they don't back down and they say, no, I don't want to go ahead with that, and you can't agree just by talking to your neighbour,
What
what's the
happens
next
then?
step?
Okay, well, here's your notice to fence, and I'll see you in QCAT.
Yeah.
Ah, that easy.
Yeah, because some people, they might call the bluff, and, you know, they're never going to do anything about it. I'm not going to bother to pay any money, and the fence needs to be erected. So the owner that is pushing for it will just have to issue a notice to fence, and you'll end up in QCAT and seeking orders. And then there'll be an order for contribution, provided it's fair and reasonable for the type of fence that the person is seeking. So ultimately, if you can't resolve it, you will end up in QCAT. It'll be time and money that you spend, but you will get eventually an order for a fence to be erected or repaired and maintained, because you can't have fences falling down. It's a danger to people who are living within the property.
So if it gets to that point, you're going to be paying anyway, aren't you? So in the end, you'll pay for the fence, or half the fence, but you'll probably also have extra costs on top of that as well, won't you, to actually get to that point?
Well, that's right, and it's your time. So people are working, you need to take time off work, you've got to go to QCAT, and I don't know if anyone's ever been in QCAT, or whether you two have, but when you get there and it says on the notice, well, your matter's appearing at 9 a.m, well, you don't actually start at 9 a.m.
No.
You might not actually hear the matter until 2 o'clock.
Later in the day.
Yeah, so you could be there all day.
You can be there all day. So it's, if you can get out of QCAT, it's better. So that's just dividing fences. So we talked about other common causes of disagreements earlier, and that's where it gets quite interesting with your overhanging branches, fruit that's overhanging, and what can you do when it interrupts your use and enjoyment of your property.
Can we talk about the fruit for a second? Because that is a really interesting one. I've certainly had instances of that where neighbours have had overhanging fruit, like orange tree, for example. I can think of several examples, but say the orange tree, like the fruit is on your side of the fence, okay? So therefore, surely it makes sense that that fruit, which is on the other side of the dividing fence, is yours. How does that work? Is that true or not?
It's yours.
Yep.
Oh, it is.
So anything that hangs over your boundary, okay, is yours to do as you wish. So there's a couple of options, and I want to have the listeners take away some reasonable ideas here, and not sort of be a little bit reckless with, oh well, here's another branch on my ground, and throw it recklessly and carelessly to the other side. So what you can do is, you've got overhanging branches and you've got fruit, for example. You can pick the fruit and keep it, eat it, throw it away,
Make
whatever you
marmalade,
like. That's
yeah,
right.
jam,
Whatever whatever turns you on. So yes, you can do that.
Soda and lime.
That's it, exactly.
Stiff drink, that'd be nice, refreshing.
So your neighbour cannot have a go at you for doing that, because it's on your side, your boundary. And that comes back to their responsibility as a tree keeper. So I want to spend a bit more time on that, because the Act in Queensland, there's similar legislation in New South Wales, which is the Neighbourhood Disputes Dividing Fences and Trees Act in Queensland. So the core of the Act in terms of neighbourhood disputes comes down to a definition of tree keeper. And tree keeper is really the person that has trees on their land, and they have the legal obligation to maintain and care for those trees. And if they don't, and for example, overhanging branches, fruits, roots that go underneath the fence and cause damage, maybe you've got a concrete patio abutting the fence, or other issues that causes cracks. So the neighbour next to you has an obligation to maintain and repair.
Yeah,
And
if they don't,
Well, there's a certain monetary sum under the legislation where you can actually force them to pay up to a certain amount per year for maintenance and repair if they don't do it. So if they don't do it, you can talk to them and say, look, you've caused damage. I've asked you repeatedly. You haven't, trimmed down your tree so the branches aren't hanging. You haven't taken care of that tree that you're supposed to as a tree keeper by having an expert come in to make sure that the roots no longer
encroach on my side.
exactly, and how they do that I don't know. You have to get experts in. But if you don't do that, then I'm going to do it, and I'm going to give you the bill.
What about if they go ahead and poison the root on their side, or lop the tree off?
Well, that's part of maintenance and care. However, you have to be careful with trees because you can have tree preservation orders in place. So, and that's by law. So that comes down to the size of the tree.
So you're best off keeping it professional, handing them the notice, and then they handle it from there.
And if they don't, then you can actually take care of that yourself, because it is creating a nuisance to your side of the property. You can't use and enjoy your property the way that you did before, and that's fair enough, particularly with the use of solar panels and with TV reception. So if a tree is above a certain height, I think it's 2.5 metres above the ground, and that's causing that disturbance on your side, then you can actually take care of that yourself. So with overhanging branches, if they continue to go over your side, chop them off, throw them over. You can dispose of them yourself, or you can just throw them over the side and say, here you go, neighbour.
Yep, there you go, it's all yours.
Same with the fruit. If you don't want to keep it and you don't want to throw it in your bin,
Whip it
right?
back, yep.
Throw it back, right? Just don't throw it in their window or do
Or at their
anything
head.
reckless or in their head. Exactly right. Because your argument is this is a potential danger,
Yes.
particularly with heavy branches, because if some of the trees, when they just fall, they can actually cause physical damage to the person who may be standing underneath it.
That's right, health and safety.
That's it. This is Talking Law on Radio 97 with Despina Priello. And if you have a question about anything to do with law, then Despina is happy to help you out. Just send us an email, just a couple of details, and send it to breakfast@radio97.com.au. And Despina is with us every Thursday morning at this time. She'll be happy to answer any question you have. So it's breakfast@radio97.com.au. We'll have more in just a second.